Welcome to Peacebuilding with Dr. Pollack, where I discuss the science of workplace conflict and peace and present short courses with practical techniques to resolve conflicts in daily life. I'm Jeremy Pollack. I'm a social organizational psychologist with a specialty in peace and conflict psychology. I'm also the CEO of Pollack Peacebuilding Systems. We're an international workplace conflict management consulting and training firm, and our training wing, the Peaceful Leaders Academy. Today, I'm going to present to you a short course on the efficacy and use cases of psychometric assessment tools for conflict management. It's designed to help you understand how conflict style assessments work and how you might use them in an organizational setting to help employees and leaders better understand themselves and each other with regard to their conflict management styles. I'll also provide a list of research studies and papers referenced throughout this course in the description for those who are interested. A psychometric assessment is what we often call a test or a tool or an instrument. It's typically in the form of a questionnaire or a survey, and it's used to measure a set of psychological or behavioral patterns of the people taking the assessment. In the case of conflict management style assessments, we're attempting to identify particular sets of patterns or tendencies to how people respond to or behave during conflict. And one can see how assessing or becoming aware of such tendencies can be beneficial, especially in the workplace. Our ability to understand how leaders and employees approach and handle conflict is increasingly important for building trust in relationships, for team cohesion, interpersonal productivity, collaboration, which ultimately, hopefully, leads to successful organizational outcomes. The psychometric assessments that we're going to discuss in this course aren't just theoretical tools, they're practical instruments that have been scientifically developed and validated to help us understand our natural tendencies during conflict situations. What makes these assessments particularly valuable is their ability to provide objective insights into something that's typically very subjective, which is the way or styles in which we tend to or prefer to manage conflict. And by measuring these specific sort of behavioral patterns and responses to conflict, these tools can help us develop greater self-awareness and enable organizations to build more effective teams. Throughout this short course, we're going to examine several major assessment tools, their applications, and how they can be effectively implemented in organizational settings. We'll start by looking at the most widely used assessments in the field, and then we'll dive into their specific features and validity and reliability measures, which we'll talk about, and practical applications for implementing these sorts of assessments in the workplace. So anytime we're considering using an assessment instrument, any type of survey or tool that purports to tell us something real and meaningful about ourselves or the world, we should be aware of two main components of the instrument, and that's validity and reliability. So validity measures how accurately an assessment evaluates its intended traits. In other words, we measure validity to make sure the assessment is actually measuring what it says it's actually measuring. In this case, that the conflict style assessment is actually telling us something accurate about a person's real conflict style. Without statistically validated measures, we can't be sure if it's truly measuring what it's claiming to measure. So we should be very cautious about making decisions or creating programs or interventions based on assessments that have not been systematically validated. Now, there are different types of validity, and we'll talk about a few of these, not too much in depth, but just going into it a little bit. So one of the most important types of validity is called construct validity. And in psychology, a construct is an abstract concept or a theoretical idea that represents something that can't be directly observed, but it can be measured through specific indicators or behaviors. So constructs are used to basically explain psychological phenomena, and they're often assessed using psychometric tools. Some constructs in psychology include things like emotional intelligence or self-esteem or resilience or motivation, in this case, conflict management styles. So construct validity ensures that a test actually is measuring the construct it's designed to measure, which in this case is conflict management style. Then there's content validity, which checks if the test covers virtually all the important aspects of the concept being measured. There's also criterion validity, which compares the test to other established measures of the same concept. So if it's actually measuring conflict management styles, it might be compared statistically to other previously validated measures of conflict style. In terms of measuring these various forms of validity, There are a few different statistical methods. One of the more common methods is something called factor analysis, and that includes exploratory and confirmatory factor analyses. And there's also convergent validity and discriminant validity and a few other methods that we won't dive into too deeply here. But suffice to say that validity is generally very important when you're looking at a psychometric assessment, and knowing what statistical tests have been used to prove validity can be important as well. Finally, one more form of validity I want to just touch on is called face validity. And this considers whether the test looks like it measures what it's supposed to be measuring, at least on the surface. So face validity is used in psychological research when a valid instrument doesn't exist, for instance, for what someone wants to measure. Researchers don't typically consider face validity as a strong predictor of a correlation because it is generally superficial and a little bit subjective. That being said, face validity and face value can be very important. Sometimes if a measure doesn't have face validity, we should question whether it's an appropriate measure. So a well-known example, for instance, of a psychometric test with face validity is the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which a lot of companies use. The questions clearly relate to personality traits, like things like, do you enjoy being in social settings? And that's hopefully a question about extroversion. So respondents can easily understand the link between the items they're being asked and the personality traits they claim to measure. So most people agree that the test seems to measure personality effectively, even if its construct validity is still debated. So it has face validity, potentially not great construct validity. Okay, so we're not going to dive too much more deeply into validity, but just know that we need to make sure the tests we're using, the instruments we're using, have been proven to be valid in some way. Okay, now let's discuss a little bit about reliability. So reliability in a psychometric test measures the consistency of results of a test over time. High reliability means the test yields stable and replicable assessment outcomes. In other words, if a test of conflict management styles, for instance, is unreliable, meaning it's inconsistent for that same person over time, or it's not replicable in different samples of respondents, then again, it's difficult to say the test actually works to reveal something that's real or meaningful. So like validity, high reliability is critical when making decisions about how to interpret or implement the results of an assessment. If we can't rely on the assessment to be consistent over time or across diverse populations, then how do we really know it's actually measuring something stable or useful? Also, like validity, there are different types of reliability. So test-retest reliability, for example, measures the stability and consistency of an assessment tool over time. It evaluates whether the same respondents obtain similar scores when they take the test on two different occasions under similar conditions. We also have inter-rater reliability, and that focuses on an agreement between different assessors. So if the assessment relies on assessor observation, do the various observers agree on what they observed? So that could be an important one, especially for observational research. Internal consistency reliability assesses the homogeneity of items within a single test. So this tells us how reliably an assessment tool measures a single construct or concept. In other words, are these various items or questions in a tool or a survey correlated, or are they working together to measure the intended construct or concept? And this is typically measured using a statistical technique called Cronbach's alpha. A higher alpha value, typically above 0.7, indicates that the test items consistently measure the same construct. Finally, we have parallel forms and split half reliability, which examine consistency between different versions or halves of the same test. Okay, so we've gone over some of the important sort of technical aspects of psychometric assessments. Let's explore a few of the major assessments of conflict management styles. So the first that I want to touch on is the Thomas-Kilmann conflict mode instrument, or TKI. Is basically the gold standard in conflict style assessments. It's a 30-item forced choice instrument. It measures 5 distinct conflict modes. What makes TKI particularly valuable is its widespread adoption. And it's got proven reliability across diverse populations and cultural contexts. So this is a very widely accepted measure of conflict style. We also have the Rahim Organizational Conflict Inventory 2, known as ROKI 2. This is a 28-item assessment tool. It's unique in its ability to differentiate conflicts between subordinates and peers and even with superiors. So it makes it especially valuable in organizational settings. We'll dive into that a little bit deeper in just a moment. The Roki 2 also measures 5 interpersonal conflict styles, but this is specifically designed for workplaces. And the third I want to touch on a little more deeply is the conflict dynamics profile. So this is designed to enhance self-awareness regarding conflict behaviors within organizational settings. So the CDP evaluates 15 distinct behavioral responses to conflict, and it's categorized into these 2 main buckets: constructive behaviors, which promote positive conflict resolution, like perspective taking and creating solutions, and destructive behaviors, which are basically detrimental actions like displaying anger or retaliating, something like that. It's divided into 3 sections. It's a 360 assessment, so it requires responses from peers, supervisors, and direct reports. So let's dive a little bit deeper into each of these tools, and then I'll briefly highlight several others worth exploring as well if you're interested in using psychometric assessments for this in your workplace. So the Thomas Kilmann instrument, which was developed by Kenneth Thomas and Ralph Kilmann in the 1970s, stands out as a well-established conflict management assessment tool, and it has several notable features and strong empirical backing. The instrument, again, consists of 30 paired choice items that measure 5 distinct conflict handling modes. These are competing, collaborating, compromising, avoiding, and accommodating. The reliability metrics of the TKI are particularly noteworthy, with test-retest reliability coefficients ranging from 0.61 to 0.68 across different modes. And this, again, measures the stability of the test results over time. These values are in the moderate range, but they represent an improvement over earlier conflict assessment tools. And the internal consistency coefficients range from about 0.43 to 0.71, which does demonstrate acceptable reliability for this type of behavioral measure. The instrument has also demonstrated significant convergent validity with other established tools, particularly the Hall Conflict Management Survey. So that means that the tool indeed likely measures what it intends to measure. One of TKI's key strengths is the way its questions are posed. It's designed to minimize social desirability response bias, which is when people basically answer questions in a way that they think is socially acceptable rather than being totally honest. And this is a common challenge in self-report assessments, so we want to do whatever we can to avoid this response bias because it helps us ensure more accurate and honest responses from participants. Now, the Roki 2, the Rahim Organizational Conflict Inventory, was developed by Afzalur Rahim in the 1980s, is one of the most comprehensive and widely used tools for assessing conflict styles in organizational settings. The assessment consists of 28 items that participants rate on a 5-point Likert scale. It's measuring 5 distinct conflict management approaches: integrating, obliging, dominating, avoiding, and compromising. And this provides a nuanced understanding of how individuals handle workplace conflicts. The Roki 2 has demonstrated satisfactory reliability metrics. Internal consistency measured by Chromebox Alpha ranges from 0.72 to 0.77, which is great. Very acceptable reliability across its subscales. Test-retest reliability coefficients over a week interval vary between 0.6 and 0.83. Again, this is moderate to strong stability in responses over time. It's also proven strong construct validity in organizational settings. This, again, indicates that it accurately measures what it claims to measure. Confirmatory factor analyses have consistently supported the instrument's 5-factor structure, and research has also shown that it maintains its reliability and validity across different cultural contexts. So this is a very globally applicable assessment tool. One of Roki 2's unique strengths is that it distinguishes between conflicts with different organizational relationships. So whether someone's dealing with a superior or a subordinate or a peer, this contextual awareness is crucial because people often adapt their conflict style based on the relationship dynamic, based on sometimes the hierarchical relationship. So another really useful tool. Now, the conflict dynamics profile, which is the last one we'll dive a little more deeply into, this was developed by Eckerd College's Leadership Development Institute in 2004, and it's designed to help enhance self-awareness regarding conflict behaviors in organizational settings. So unlike traditional models of these style assessments that focus on just styles or approaches, the CDP really emphasizes behavioral responses to conflict. It gives sort of a nuanced perspective of how individuals react under stress. It's also administered in a 360 fashion, similar to the Rahim, It requires respondents and their peers and their supervisors and direct reports. But what makes this quite unique is that it evaluates 15 distinct behavioral responses to conflict. And these behavioral responses are categorized into constructive behaviors, which again promote positive conflict resolution techniques or methods, and destructive behaviors, things like getting angry or retaliating against someone in some way. It also identifies personal hot buttons, so specific triggers that can escalate conflicts. So again, the CDP is really designed to help people recognize both their reactive behaviors to conflict and the underlying triggers that might activate these behaviors. Research has found that the CDP has very strong psychometric properties, internal consistency, showing Cronbach's alpha typically exceeds 0.7, with over 60% of the items surpassing 0.8. So this is very high reliability. And test-retest reliability ranges from 0.7 to 0.8 over a 2-week interval. So again, this indicates very consistent responses over time. So we've discussed some of the more prominent conflict management style assessments. I think it's also important to be aware of the broader landscape of available tools. So I just want to mention these quickly. These range from inventories like the conflict resolution styles inventory and the styles of conflict inventory to maybe more specialized tools like the Craybill conflict style inventory, which focuses on intercultural conflict, or the organizational communication conflict instrument. We also have things like the conflict management style scales, which measures conflict resolution styles in a family or a friendship context, or the workplace interpersonal conflict scale, which measures the frequency and intensity of interpersonal conflicts in workplace settings. So each of these assessments offers a little bit of a unique perspective on conflict management styles, so understanding their specific focus can help you choose the right tool for your needs. It's worth at least exploring a little bit. I go into these in a little bit more detail in the supplemental ebook you get if you're part of the Peaceful Leaders Club, so if you are, check that out. Before we utilize conflict management style assessments in our organizations, before we implement them, I think it's important to acknowledge several key issues or limitations that could impact their effectiveness and their application. First, it's important to realize that conflict styles are highly context dependent. So someone might use different approaches depending on the situation or the relationship dynamic at play. What works in one scenario might be ineffective in another scenario. So this makes it difficult to categorize someone's style as fixed or consistent. So we're taking a test, we come up with some sort of style that I have, but I need to be aware of this could change depending on the context. Now, the interaction between personality traits and situational factors adds another layer of complexity. This is actually a big debate in the sort of personality psychology field as to whether, how stable personalities actually are. It seems that we think our personalities are much more stable than they actually are. The way we behave and how our personality shows up is actually quite context dependent. So the same goes for people's conflict management approaches. They often result from this sort of dynamic interplay between someone's inherent tendencies and the immediate environmental influences. So again, this makes it challenging to really isolate and measure these variables accurately. Even with construct validity, it's hard to distinguish what we're measuring sometimes. Are we measuring a personality trait? Are we measuring a conflict style? Are we measuring just a context-dependent situation? What is it we're measuring? So again, just a limitation to keep in mind. Now, the effectiveness of different conflict styles varies significantly based on specific scenarios. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to conflict management that works universally. And this makes it difficult to make broad recommendations based on assessment results. We really have to keep this in mind when trying to interpret or make decisions based on the results of an assessment. Different styles, different approaches will be more preferable in different situations. We also face a limitation in terms of longitudinal research. There are relatively few studies that track how conflict management styles evolve or remain stable over long periods of time. And this leaves some gaps in our understanding of style consistency and their development. So just another thing to keep in mind when trying to interpret results from one of these assessments. Another significant challenge is the self-reporting nature of most conflict style assessments. People's perceptions of how they handle conflict can differ from their actual behaviors in real-world conflict situations. Sometimes we'll answer questions about ourselves in socially desirable ways or in ways that align with our own self-concept, a positive self-concept perhaps, but they may not be accurate in terms of our actual behavior in certain situations or how we're perceived by others. So again, this can lead to discrepancies between our assessment results and our real-world behaviors. And one more limitation to keep in mind, many assessment tools carry cultural biases in their design and interpretation. Because what's considered appropriate conflict management in one culture may be viewed differently in another culture. But unfortunately, many assessments don't adequately account for these cultural differences. So keeping these limitations in mind, this isn't to say that we shouldn't be using assessments or that they're not useful in some way. They can be very useful for a number of reasons. But we just have to keep in mind some of the limitations of these instruments and of self-report psychometric tools in general, whether you're giving out personality tests or behavioral tests of some sort. So we've talked about limitations. Let's talk a little bit now about what some of the practical uses are for these assessments. Let's dive into some real-world pragmatic applications of using these tools in organizations. How and when might we want to implement them in our workplace, and what can they ultimately tell us about ourselves and our teams to help us improve and be more effective? When it comes to selecting the right assessment tools, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Your choice in which tool should be used ought to be guided by a few main factors. So number one, your specific organizational needs, like what are you wanting to measure, what's important there, what are your specific goals, both culturally in your workplace as well as operationally. You also want to look at proven validity and reliability scores, like we talked about, of an assessment tool, make sure they're actually measuring what they say they are measuring and are consistent over time. And you want to make sure you take into consideration the characteristics of your target population, like their language, their cultural context, and even the organizational level of the participants. Are they in a supervisory role or not? So a lot of things to consider, and especially what you want to be measuring, what's going to be useful for you, and if you get the results, what are you going to do with them? So all of that should be taken into consideration when trying to figure out which tools to use and then how to use them. Another thing to keep in mind is that assessments shouldn't exist in isolation. So in other words, if you're looking to assess conflict management skills of a team, if you want to know how your team members typically respond to conflict, the most effective approach is to integrate these types of assessments with other methods like direct observation and regular feedback mechanisms. However you can gather that data from multiple angles is very smart. This creates a comprehensive development program that assesses and addresses conflict management from multiple angles. That all being said, when we decide we do want to work with an assessment tool, we decide which tool we want to use, I'll throw out a few ideas for you to think about in terms of its implementation. One way to implement an assessment is through a team workshop or a training session of some sort. You could start by having everyone complete the assessment to identify their conflict management styles. And then once the results are in, you could facilitate a group discussion where team members can share their styles and reflect on how different approaches interact in workplace situations. This can be quite engaging. It could be quite fun. You can use some role-playing exercises if you want to simulate some sort of real workplace conflicts and allowing employees to see how their styles come into play, and they can practice adapting to different situations. They could even try changing their styles deliberately throughout a conflict. So lots of interesting, fun kind of ways to play with this once you've gotten some results, and so people become more aware, and then they can actually start to be more deliberate about their strategy, their conflict strategy. This is a very interactive approach of implementing and working with assessments. I highly recommend it. It not only builds self-awareness, it also helps improve team communication, collaboration, and a little bit of team building. Now, if you want to focus on managers and leaders and helping them improve how they handle conflict, I might start by assessing their style, their conflict management style or approach through your leadership development program or your management training program. You could just make these sorts of assessments part of the standardized mechanism in these programs, part of their standard process, assuming that you have some sort of leadership training and professional development process in place. And again, once you have results from these types of assessments, you can use them to identify each leader's or developing leader's strengths and maybe areas of improvement in managing team conflicts, as this is going to be very important for a leader or a supervisor to be able to effectively manage conflict. This kind of insight can guide targeted coaching sessions. If you're doing leadership coaching, leaders can learn how to adapt their conflict resolution style based on different situations, and they can do some role playing, again, maybe with their coach or with whoever, another, the supervising leader or a executive team who's implementing this. The goal here, again, being to develop more effective, adaptable, and emotionally intelligent leaders that can navigate workplace challenges with more competence and confidence. I can't tell you probably 90% of the conflicts we deal with are a result of some sort of ineffective leadership. Maybe it's a direct conflict leader or an indirect conflict, meaning the leader has not done their job to properly manage conflict among team members. But lots of conflicts happen because there is some lack of competence or confidence from a leader in handling conflict. So really good assessment to put into place so that you can use it for some targeted improvement areas and coaching to develop that leader. Now, assessment results can also be super helpful in actual conflict mediation. So for instance, if you're a leader or you're in HR or maybe you're an internal ombuds, if you were to facilitate a conflict resolution process or a dialogue between coworkers who are in conflict, it could be helpful to run an assessment to gain insight into each person's conflict management style. From a mediator's perspective, understanding how each person naturally approaches conflict obviously can help you identify potential areas of tension and tailor your mediation strategy a little bit. From the participant's perspective, it can help each person become more self-aware. So they have more conscious control over how they are showing up and communicating during dialogue. They can also become more aware of each other's style if they're willing to share that. And that can help them show up in a different or maybe more deliberate way to dialogue together more effectively. If you're acting as the mediator, understanding how each person naturally approaches conflict can obviously help you identify potential areas of tension or things that might trigger one or the other, and you can tailor your mediation strategy accordingly. Now, from the perspective of the participants, very useful as well. It can help each person become more self-aware on the one hand, so that they become more conscious, so that they have more conscious control, more deliberate control over the type of strategy they use, how they're showing up, how they're communicating during a dialogue. And if each person's willing to share their assessment with their counterparts in the dialogue, it can actually help them understand each other and potentially adjust their styles accordingly. And this knowledge of each other's styles might not only help resolve the immediate dispute more effectively, it can also help equip the participants with better conflict management skills for future interactions with each other. So it can be very important there. Another way we might want to integrate these style assessments is into performance reviews. This can be a very useful way to help employees develop stronger interpersonal and problem-solving skills in general. If we include these types of assessments as just sort of part of our performance evaluation process, we can use the process, our evaluation process, to provide constructive feedback. We can use it to identify areas where improvement in managing conflict could potentially enhance their overall performance. During those evaluation processes, we could help create individualized action plans that focus on enhancing their conflict management abilities, whether that's through targeted training or coaching or skill building exercises, however that turns out. But again, anything we can do to help employees better understand their own conflict styles, their own tendencies, and then subsequently improve those approaches is almost certainly going to improve workplace relationships and communication. And one more way we might want to think about using these assessments is through some sort of annual or semi-annual team-wide or organizational-wide assessment, maybe a survey of some sort. This is another recommended practice. Now, you might want to have a third party manage it, especially if there's maybe trust issues about privacy or anonymity. However you implement these organizational assessments, they will hopefully be a powerful way to build stronger, more cohesive teams by helping everybody understand their own and their colleagues' conflict approaches. They generally help us gain valuable insights into team dynamics. They identify which styles naturally complement each other maybe, and where potential clashes might arise. All of this awareness is really a proactive way of addressing conflicts before they escalate, before they spiral out of control. So again, this type of environment where we can manage conflict proactively, it becomes more psychologically or emotionally safe because differences or disputes or disagreements are managed constructively on a regular basis, and these sort of larger conflicts are headed off early. In general, if we're able to help people become more aware of their conflict styles, and then as a result, improve those styles in some way or improve their approaches or improve their communication, we're really going to help our teams develop better relationships, increase trust, more peaceful and resilient workplace cultures. So if we can use these and implement them in effective ways, it can be super, super important for our organization. Now, if we do decide to implement assessments at work, it's also important to track the effectiveness of these interventions by monitoring changes in conflict styles over time. Are people developing? Are they changing? Are they learning more about themselves? The data gathered from these assessments over time can help inform the development of maybe more customized conflict management strategies or training programs that we want to implement to get people skilled up in communication and conflict resolution skills. Again, combining psychometric assessment data with other sources like observational programs or 360-degree feedback programs, all of this provides a more holistic understanding of the dynamics of an organization, especially with regard to how well we can manage conflict. At the end of the day, we got to ask, what are the real and meaningful things that conflict style assessments can tell us about ourselves and about our team members? For oneself, these assessments can increase self-awareness around your go-to management preferences and tendencies, whether it's maybe to compromise or maybe to withdraw, or maybe you give in easily or get angry. Any sort of self-assessment that tells us something real about ourselves can illuminate our strengths and weaknesses so that we can either improve or simply just be more deliberate about the kind of strategy that we choose in any given situation. Knowing our natural inclinations is the first step to improving how we navigate conflict, communication, and our relationships in general. For our team members, these assessments can help colleagues better understand each other's individual conflict styles. Understanding each other's styles fosters more mutual understanding. It fosters better relationships, hopefully better communication, a little more trust. All of this is absolutely beneficial for generally better communication and teamwork. Imagine a team where everyone understands why their colleague approaches conflict in a specific way. This opens doors for empathy, for patience, and ultimately more productive conflict resolution. And it can be quite fun to take these assessments and share results and learn about each other. It's a great way to build the sense of being on a team. And as a leader, you'll also be able to more easily identify potential friction points between different team members, which hopefully makes it easier to anticipate and address conflicts before they escalate. And the results can highlight developmental needs, which helps us pinpoint opportunities for conflict resolution training or coaching so we can improve teamwork and ultimately create a more collaborative work environment. Now, just a few reminders about interpreting and applying results. Anytime we administer psychometric assessments, we have to remember a few important things. Number one, our behaviors or our tendencies can vary dramatically based on the context. In other words, just because we might identify a typical pattern or style doesn't mean we always exhibit it. Every situation, every relational dynamic can and often does alter the style in which we show up. For instance, the way I interact with my employee will differ from the way I interact with my boss or my peers or my family members. Context absolutely matters. So that being said, we have to consider an individual's specific work context and what their role requirements are and what might be effective in one situation or might not in another situation, because it's unfair to suggest that someone needs to, let's say, improve or alter their style across the board when their particular style might be appropriate or useful in certain contexts. We should also be looking at how someone's style or tendencies fit within the larger cultural context. If we have a work culture that's highly competitive or it feels sort of cutthroat, then it may be somewhat maladaptive to insist someone become more compromising or collaborative, since that might put the person in a worse position relative to the norms of our particular culture. So in that case, it might be more effective to first look at altering the culture from top down, talking to leadership rather than asking individual contributors to change themselves. The other major thing to consider is that if we do see areas for improvement in ourselves or other team members who have completed an assessment, remember, These results should be viewed as a starting point for development. They shouldn't be seen as fixed labels of someone's abilities or capacities. The goal here is to use this information to encourage growth and improvement in conflict management skills. And this approach or this goal suggests that by default, everyone can improve if they're properly motivated. That being said, it can be important to help team members understand how enhancing or improving skills will help them in their career goals. Important to help get them motivated, because just because someone sees room for improvement doesn't mean that they're going to take the steps to actually improve. They need to see why they should put in the effort of changing or developing and how it can lead them to their goals more efficiently. And then it's always helpful to sit down, get granular, and really build a step-by-step action plan with someone where they know exactly what they need to do differently to improve, how they need to show up exactly. Make it very behavior and action focused so that it's not abstract or vague. Okay, I hope this course on using conflict management style assessments was helpful. Please feel free to download your supplemental ebook in the course portal. And as always, let me know if you have any feedback or suggestions at all so I can improve future courses. Or if you have any suggestions for course topics, please let me know. Just email me at jeremy@peacefulleadersacademy.com. Thank you for tuning in, and see you again soon.